Okay, this lesson's about viruses, parasites, and fungus. We've covered off on bacteria, and these are our other very important pathogens. Right, our parasites, they're considered, they're often protozoan or they're often protista or amoeba. So we're talking about those single cell organisms that they are pretty mobile. They have often got flagella and they can swim around. You often find them in water supplies. And if we do microscope slides or wet mounts, we often find them in our pond water. And we often call them endoparasites because they need to live inside. So that endo prefix meaning they're living inside a host. So they need something else to carry them around and help them live. They can use multiple hosts. So you might find that different species of animals will host different types of, say, even worms. Worms are often considered these parasites, and they can pass, therefore, often from the meat in via the eggs into our stomachs, or just simple things like transmission via fecal oral. All right, the treatment obviously depends on the parasite because they're all going to be very, very different, particularly based on where they're going to live within the body. So malaria is a really, really big one, and the important part to know about malaria is that it's going to pass from the mosquito, that's its vector, to the human, and it's going to live in very different places in those two hosts there. So in the human, what happens is it will grow and reproduce inside the liver before it starts to go out and live inside the red blood cells. Red blood cells are going to pass through that liver and they're going to jump on in. So diagnosis of malaria happens through seeing these parasites in red blood cells in a blood smear. In the actual vector, so inside the malarial infected mosquito, it's going to live partially in the salivary gland. So that's how it gets transmitted to us when they bite us. Now, it's common in tropical regions because that's where the vector is mostly able to live. So tropical areas along the equator often, or they have really stagnant water, which is where mosquitoes will live. So if you've got a dry pond or something like that, you'll often see a lot of mosquitoes, and that's what happens in areas where there's quite a lot of rain, and therefore really good habitat for those mosquitoes. Some common parasites. You've got Giardia, which is often found in water supplies and can give you really horrifying diarrhea. Looks pretty cute, but is a bit of a killer, right? It can give you dysentery. You've got hookworm, which is a superficial parasite. You can often see it under the skin. Got a nice little face. It's pretty, got some memes, got some good memes going about it. But it, again, not a fun one to get. Tapeworms, again, have a pretty complex head there in order for them to stick inside. And this one happens inside the intestinal tract. So it's going to be able to grow quite long and stick in there. So it's got these kind of sucking devices on its head to keep it in there. Very common for these to be in the intestinal tract, and these horrifying diagrams show all the different places they like to live. So if you've got your large intestine there, you can potentially have this worm. What is this one? The whipworms are the smaller ones. All right, your tapeworm has the potential to grow quite long because it's living mostly in your large intestines, but you've got a whole other range that can potentially live in your small intestines as well. So there's that hookworm head again and the tapeworm. Okay, viruses, they are non-living, they are non-cellular. What they are is submicroscopic. You need an electron microscope to be able to view the structure of them. You can't see them under a normal microscope. And they are basically nucleic acid with protein around them. Okay, so there might be DNA in the middle, it might be RNA, so single-stranded versus double-stranded, and they've got a protein shell to protect them. Now, this is the classic one that we often see. It's called the bacteriophage, and it has all the little spidery legs to help it out. But they come in many shapes and sizes, and often they are just that kind of spherical capsule with little bits and bobs around the outside. The Ebola virus, very different shaped to any of these ones as well. These are often quite angular. The Ebola is a lot more worm-like. Right, they can trigger cells to engulf them because they are parasitic as well. They need cells to engulf them. It's not about living in an entire organism. It's about just entering a cell or two. They can spread really easily, which is why we say something has gone viral, because the transmission of these is very, very quick and easy. They are parasitic. They need a host cell, not a host organism, but a host cell to invade. Once they invade, they then use that body's replication. So in any other situation, they would go through mitosis. These guys start to hijack those systems and use their photocopier. Essentially, they say, all right, well, I'm going to photocopy my DNA, and then I'm going to spread myself over and over. Eventually, they will burst that cell, spread out, and jump on into another cell until it continues that cycle over and over, and they're infected heaps and heaps. They mutate really rapidly because they're only a small amount of DNA. They have the potential to mutate one or two just little molecules in there, and then suddenly they are a new strain. Okay, so that happens very, very regularly. We talk about the flu virus, and every year we might get a flu jab, a flu vaccination to ward us off from the flu for that season. But by the time the flu comes around, it's actually a different strain that it was last year. So what they've immunized us against is the old strain, because that's our best guess at what it's going to be similar to in the next flu season. They're unaffected by antibiotics, right? We have antivirals, but in order to try and kill off the virus, we have to try and avoid damaging the host cell. When the virus is in the host cell, that becomes really, really tricky, right? So we often just leave viruses untreated, left to run their course, which is easy to say when it's a flu. It's not as easy to say when it's Ebola and you're bleeding out of every orifice, right? Very, very unpleasant. And so that's why they try very hard to get antivirals, but it's not necessarily always going to work. Immunisation tends to train the immune response, and that's what we aim to do. So obviously we can't get in there with drugs. We have to rely on our own immune systems, and that's what those immunisations are doing. There's some really recent and current research about how some antibiotics may actually have the potential to affect some viral infections. So very early days on this kind of research, and obviously may not apply for every single virus. Okay, really common viruses. Varicella zoster virus is our chickenpox virus. Most of us have received that, and if not, we have more likely received an immunisation for it. If you get it when you're young, you get chickenpox. If you are, say, like one of those people who do not get chickenpox when they are young, when you get it as an adult, it comes on a bit stronger and a bit harder as shingles, and it's apparently very unpleasant. All right, Epstein-Barr, I've had it. That's our glandular fever. We often hear it as glandular fever. It's kissing disease, or it's often called infectious mononucleosis. Just one of those spherical ones again, and it really makes your lymph nodes around your neck really, really blow up. So when I had it, they were so big I couldn't really swallow because I was closing in on my throat. Human papillomavirus is pretty unpleasant. Okay, and human papillomavirus is one virus that causes changes, and this is a cervix, right? So this is why pap smears occur, because a human papillomavirus causes cellular changes in the cervix, right? So it can lead to cancerous changes. If you are passing along HPV to women, then there is the potential for that cervical cancer to occur, and any other kind of things like uterine cancer as well. So we've started the Gardasil vaccine is against the HPV. So we are trying to eliminate it in populations. And the pap smear test doesn't occur as often. What they do now is instead of once every 2 years, they do it once every 5 years. And it actually just tests for the virus. It doesn't necessarily test for changes anymore. It tests for the presence of the virus, because that's more likely to be an indicator of whether you're going to get those cancerous changes. Right, the common cold, or the rhinovirus. Rhino is Greek for nose, and it's one of the smallest viruses around. It's really, really tiny compared to some of these other ones, and obviously transmission via the nose, and it can kind of stick on to the membrane proteins and jump on into those cells. Fungal infections, pretty nasty. Don't go Googling. There's about 1.5 million fungi species, but only about 300 infect humans. So relatively speaking, not too many, but 300 still infecting humans is quite a lot. They have more mild pathology, but they are often very long-term diseases. They are chronic. They are unpleasant. They are often superficial, so skin and nails. So we've got some pretty gross nails here, and our skin, very, very common to see it on the feet. They are considered heterotrophic, so they need that organic compounds. They're not, they're not photosynthetic. They can't create their own, and they act parasitic in a way during those infections. They like warm, continuously moist areas. Pretty unpleasant, right? Again, photos you're going to see pretty gross, but the dead skin in those areas is the easy food, right? It starts to shed, and therefore, particularly in, say, feet, if you're in socks all day, you're going to have that moist, warm area, and you're going to have a lot of dead skin down there. So there's your classic tinea. Tinea is our one, and yeast infections as well. Right, so one of the yeast infections is Candida albicans, and it's very, very common. It's opportunistic. It already appears in the female vagina, so therefore, if there is any change in the level of bacteria, so the normal flora, it can jump on in and overgrow. So also common in, say, tongues, faces. Tinea corporis, which is across the body, versus, say, tinea pedis, which is on the feet. Again, we're talking that moist, warm area. They talk about wearing, thongs in communal showers and things like that, and really washing off, changing your socks, all that kind of stuff, so that you actually eliminate how much of that moist, warm area is available.